Okay, so now we're live. Um, cool. All right, so if that's okay, we'll do that. Um, this is a horrible way to start a broadcast. All right. So as always, there are three readings: first, second, and gospel. And like I was telling you right now, I'm going to do a quick like kind of recap because I don't think we really need to read the readings this week, just because they're really familiar stories. I think to people that tend to go to church kind of often. The first one is from First Kings, and it's when Elijah is waiting in the cave for God, and he kind of walks to the opening of the cave, and there's the wind and the earthquake and the fire, and God's not in any of them, and then there's the quiet, just like the stillness, like the little kind of breeze, and God's there, and that's the first one. You guys familiar with that, right? You guys know what I'm talking about, right?
Right.
Yeah. The second reading, a little less known, but it's not really a story or anything. It's Paul right after him saying that nothing can separate us last week from God, from the love of God. He's kind of telling us that he's like anguished. What? No, nothing can separate us from God. Last week that was the reading. He's kind of like anguished because his people, the Israelites, are not all following, doing the right thing, and they're not, and a lot of them are, uh, going against Christianity and all this kind of stuff. So he's really kind of anguished about it, and he's saying if it would be possible, I would even like not be, I would just separate myself from God for them to be kind of saved, I guess. But then he realizes later on, and this is not part of the reading, but he realizes later on that his people, the Israelites, aren't just the Israelites, the nation of Israel. It's the new Israel, right? The new Israel of Christianity, and so that brings him kind of a solace. And in the gospel, so last week we had Jesus trying to get away because he heard that his cousin had been killed, John the Baptist, and he ends up feeding this huge multitude of people. So this week it's right after that, in the chapter 14, and he goes away again. He's like, okay, I didn't really get my rest, so he goes away again. They go to the other side of the lake, and the disciples wait on the boat, and he goes off to go pray. And a while later, the weather's really bad, and this is the big story where they see him walk on the water, and they freak out because they think he's a ghost. And he says, "I'm not a ghost. I'm Jesus. You guys know me." And Peter says, "If you're really, Jesus, then tell me, command me to walk on the water, and I will." So Jesus says, "Yep, come to me." And Peter starts coming to him, and he walks on the water until he realizes that the wind is so strong, and he freaks out, and he starts to sink. He says, "Save me," and Jesus saves him and pulls him up, and he's like, why were you afraid? Didn't you know that I was here for you? So they go back on the boat, and it ends. The gospel this week ends by everybody saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." So those are the three readings: Elijah in the cave, Paul realizing the new Israel, and the disciples again saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." And really, the thought I had just briefly before we kind of start discussing it was that the first and third readings, Elijah and Peter walking on the water, they're about a person, a man who's really afraid. Elijah was really afraid because just before the first reading, what happens is he's told that they've killed all the prophets, they've murdered all the prophets, and he's a big prophet, and they're going to murder him too. And so he's really freaked out. He goes to run away. But it says he's woken up by an angel. He's given food and drink so he can have strength to go on his journey. And he's led to this cave, and he's told to wait for the Lord. So he waits for the Lord at the entrance, and he finally recognizes God in the wind. And then he's given the task to go back to the place where he was afraid that they were going to kill him and continue his mission, right? So and then obviously Peter is afraid until he recognizes Jesus and goes out, and then he's afraid again when he starts sinking, and then Jesus kind of helps him out. So both of these stories are about two people who are really, really frightened until they recognize God in the wind and in the person of Jesus, and they're able to kind of continue on their way. And that's kind of what struck me about the readings this week, and even slightly the second reading is about Paul saying he's not afraid, but he's anguished. He's kind of torn about what's going on with his people until he recognizes, and loosely I guess I could say, until he recognizes God in the fact that, or he recognizes the truth in the fact that Israel isn't just a nation anymore; it's all the people who God has called in this way, in this way of Christ. So, and then that kind of like helps him keep going on his way. So that's kind of like the theme that I got from that. And maybe to start us off with the discussion, the questions I have for this week are, how do we see God? As far as like, how do we see God as someone we can trust or something that we can find solace in? And how does that affect our idea of why, or our thoughts about why we still are afraid of big things, or even small things? Like, why 2,000 years later should we be afraid, or do we ever fall into fear? That's kind of those are the questions. So with that, we can kind of open it up, I guess.
I think fear is, I guess, a natural reaction. If you put it in spiritual terms, fear is supposed to be of the enemy. And the enemy is always there to fill our ears whenever we turn from God in any minute way. There are always voices in our heads, in our society, in our neighbors, in our community, whatever, telling us the opposite of what spiritually feeds us and nourishes us and strengthens us. And it's just so human to listen to those voices. And in hard times, especially during crises, it is just what we do. In human nature. I think that the amount of faith and hope that it takes for a person to be and remain strong in the belief that God is with me, even though things are falling apart. To be a Job in the midst of a society that tells us otherwise is an amazing gift. And I think as an elder, having gone through crises and situations where I have gone through those ups and downs, thank God that I've come back up, and every time I come back up, I'm stronger than I was before. But in the midst of the crises, especially the first few, not the first one, but the first few crises in my life, that memory was not there, that God sustained me, that God helped me, that God pulled me out of the water. And the falling is just real. I mean, it's just real unless you're bolstered by a lot of people or strong enough people who are there for you and are accompanying you and holding you up in prayer. It's really difficult to stay faithful, knowing that God is there. And I think that is a weakness that we tend to have, and it's certainly what we see it all over our world. But over and over again, we see the types of stories that we are reading today in the scriptures for Sunday, that God is indeed there, and so that even when we falter, even though we start to sink, that God is still there for us, and that mercifully, we can come back up with His help. But I think it's just extremely hard to keep that faith. And I so admire the few people that I know that have been just staunch no matter what has happened in their lives. And when you and I think about just what has been happening in our family the past week, those are really tough things that parents have to go through to watch their little babies being sick and pain and going through all kinds of things and still hold on to faith. Mm-hmm. But it's true. And we come up stronger each time, spiritually speaking. We come up stronger each time.
Yep. What about you, Joe? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I think I got lost in the questions with Mom's
sorry.
response. No, it's fine. So just could you?
No, well, okay. So I had asked. So I guess I asked, how do we view God as this? as something, someone to trust in our lives? Like, how do we view our own trust of God, the trustworthiness of God, the faithfulness of God, in a way that affects the second question, which is, why do we still fear? Like, why are we still afraid? You know, we're supposed to be this people without fear. Like, we're supposed to be, we're supposed to have no reason to fear. You know, and it says it over and over again in the Bible. Do not be afraid. Do not be afraid. And yet, we do like, and I don't want to say we do that as if we can't get away from doing that, but so often that's what happens. We end up doing that. I personally think that we don't have to. I personally think that there will be a time, not like, you know, at the end, you know, the second coming kind of time, but I mean a time in our evolution, spiritually and physically, when we don't have to, when we learn that we don't really need to do that anymore, and we kind of get over that. But that's my personal thought, you know, because otherwise it's just depressing. Otherwise we're not getting any closer to being Christ-like, not only individually but as a people. So you might have got lost again, but so anyway, how do we view God as an entity to be trusted, and how does that affect why we become afraid, and then how do we get over that? How can we start to get over those fears that we have, and really actually take, you know, Jesus seriously when he says don't be afraid, and these are the reasons why you don't have to be afraid, you know?
Yeah, I mean, it's not where we are right here. You know, obviously we're having like a conversation about Catholicism, but I think there's some truth to like the whole Buddhist idea that all this comes from attachment, you know?
Yeah.
And I think that we, you know, why are you afraid? Well, you're afraid of losing something, right? You're afraid of, you know, what if this happens to my job? What if I can't provide to my family? What if, you know, you're attached to your identity, you're attached to people, you're attached to those people that you love. Like, not necessarily bad attachments, but it's from, like, I have this thing and I don't want to lose it, and so now I'm afraid. I'm afraid I'm going to get hurt because I have, like, my health, and I think of myself this way. I think a lot of it is, you know, our identity, because we're so invested in this idea of who we are that may actually be who we are, but it may actually be who we are today. More often than not, it's not even who we are today. It's this person that we wish we were today, and I think that's a huge part of where it comes from.
Yeah. Okay, so then, yeah, go ahead.
I think Jeremy is completely right. But I also think it's that anguish that, say, Paul was experiencing, that all the early Christians were experiencing, an anguish that their people had rejected the Messiah, and totally not being able to understand that. I mean, here's the Messiah. He's been predicted for centuries, and here he is, or was, because he's dead but then resurrected, and yet people rejected him. Their own people, the people that had been raised spiritually in this heritage. But that's the kind of anguish that, say, in our family experience this past couple of weeks, where, you know, two different sets of parents are anguishing because their little ones are sick. You're not afraid of your identity there. You're afraid of losing that person, that child that is so precious, and concerned and in anguish. You know, why is this happening? And of course, the tendency is to go one step further and say, God, what kind of God are you that you would allow this suffering? Or whatever that happens, however the suffering, however the crises, to attend to your question about what kind of God do we believe in, and how do we get over this reaction of fear, I think it is a learning process. And I think what you said about there may be a time when we the people, we humanity, don't necessarily have to go there, then that's a collective memory that we have to build. But in order to have a collective memory of God's salvation, have an individual experience of memory. Like in my life, being able to go back to saying, to thinking about, I know I'm in a crisis again, but I remember that I had a past crisis.
Hold on 1 second. Who is calling me? And what? I can't. I have.
Someone can hear me?
Yeah. Hold on.
I'm imagining that in the video, This is gonna sound really staged, Nathan.
Stage, why?
You sound like Mr. Rogers. Who's that on the phone now?
Hold on. Oh man,
I
see,
know.
Leanne's calling, so she's calling. I don't know why she's not. Yeah, she's not. Yeah, good grief. Okay,
She can get you invite maybe.
I'm just gonna try to invite her one more time, but and then we'll go ahead and continue. I'm inviting her while. Go ahead and continue, Mom.
Yeah, no. Well, basically, I was ending saying that it takes the memory of past successes, of past crises, and how we pulled out through the mercy of God, and how we were stronger, in order for us to be a little bit stronger the next time, and not falter. And that's individually. And so, if it's individually, it's also a communal response, a community response. And that community hopefully will, to attend to what you were saying, hopefully become a larger and larger community little by little.
It sounds to me like you're talking about faith, though, Mom. Like having faith that, the sun will actually come up tomorrow because I saw it come up today and the day before and the day before and for the last 30 years. So I'm pretty sure, like, that I'm gonna pull out of this night.
Yeah.
And I think that I know people that have had that experience of it actually has worked the last 100 times, but they're sure that this time it's not going to work. And I know
Right.
people that haven't had the experience that it has worked even once, and they have absolute faith that it will work this time.
Yeah.
So I think, I mean, absolutely that's an element, but that's not, I mean, it's more than that, right? Like it's faith.
Yes, it is.
Hmm.
Some of us just have very weak faith, and we have to come. It grows slowly, and some people just are gifted with that faith, which I think is what you're saying, Jeremy.
Okay, but hold on a second. I think that's kind of a cop out though. I think we got to be careful with thinking that people are with thinking that certain people just have it and certain people don't. I think we need to cultivate. I think that's kind of been the whole movement, of Jesus' discourses, talking about the different soils and stuff. We need to cultivate
Yeah.
those things within us, and that's the question. How? I mean, I think it would truly be a pretty horrible God indeed who would create certain people with faith and certain people with not. I don't believe in that God. That's the first question. What kind of God do we believe in? Having to do with is he someone we can trust not only to keep the sun coming up every day, to get us over those humps when things are going really bad, to help us deal with things when things just don't go well at all, but also a God we can trust to help us become the people that are more easily trust Him, and more easily are able to get over those fears, and that's because otherwise it's not in our hands. And even though there's a lot of things that aren't in our hands, I think one of the things in our hands is our ability to cultivate faith, cultivate a sense of trust. But you had something to say. I don't know if I know you guys know her, but in case no one knows her, this is my wife. Hello, wife. Okay.
I just want because you had mentioned, Nathan, that since Jesus came 2,000 years ago, you would think we kind of had the hang of this trust thing by now. And I actually think it's the opposite. Like because he came 2,000 years ago, that's a long time ago for us, not for the history of the world, but
Sure.
for us, 2,000 years, nobody lives that long, like several generations have already died out, so it's just like, that's a long time. Like, maybe, kind of one thing that I've thought before is like, Jesus was on this earth 2,000 years ago. Does he even still care about us? Is he still there? Especially in times when like I don't feel his presence, or I'm just struggling through something and I don't see a solution, or I don't see anything that he's doing, and I'm like, is God still there? Like maybe he's just horrified with the human race, like he was in the day of Noah, and he's like trying to figure out a way to destroy us all, and just like, or end the world, because he's just like, oh my gosh, everything is just awful there. So I mean, that's just
Yeah. No, yeah, I mean, and that's the kind of like that's kind of like an easy thought to kind of go to when things are hard. So then the last question then is, how do we cultivate? How do we cultivate? I mean, Jeremy, you were talking about Buddhist practices of kind of like of detachment, basically, of realizing. And I mean, and there's definitely Christian parallels to that, right?
Absolutely.
The realization of, just of stewardship. Things don't belong to me. The earth does not belong to me to dominate. I am part of the earth, and to whatever extent I can, I need to take care of these things. And then also the even and as touchy a subject as this is for people in situations that are that are hard, even our children, right? Our children are not our own. They don't belong to us. They're not ours to control, to dominate. Again, they're ours to take care of. And eventually, whether it's letting them go into their own marriage or letting them go into a vocation that might not be of our choosing or whatever, they don't belong to us. They are their own people, and our job is to just cultivate them. So what practices could we say today and invite thought into that would help cultivate a presence of mind that definitely goes through those periods of doubt and the periods of fear, because that is totally normal, but can and is able to just to move on from them as quickly as we would like to, to realize what's really troubling us and to kind of see it a little more objectively and kind of move forward.
Yeah, I mean, to me, like this, in a way, like this is the whole purpose of Catholicism, right? Like it's to be able to, or religion in general, right? Not even just Christianity, to be able to do that, like when you're dealing with death, when you're scared of what's going to happen next, to give you something else to explain how to deal with it. So, I mean, I was just like, as you were asking that question, I'm like thinking about like 20 different things, starting with just letting go, right? Like letting go of control, letting go of like who you want to be yourself, letting go of even in the case of like, oh my God, like your child is sick, you don't know if they're going to pull out of it. Can you let go of that? Like, can you actually put that in God's hands? I mean, I'm sure at some point something like that's going to happen to me. I don't even want to think about that, but that's like the ultimate thing, right? And then I thought, okay, well that's good. But on the other hand, like, you don't want to let go of everything. You want to. I mean, we're here for a reason, not to just watch, right? We're not here as observers only. And then there's the prayer that everybody knows. The Lord grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, and the courage. What's the
It's
to change
the strength to
strength to change the things that I can't, and the wisdom to know the difference, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of like that's the thing.
Yeah, definitely. So I think there's a balance, right? There's like a dichotomy, and this is a silly. I mean, we're talking about pretty serious examples here, so this is in comparison very silly. But when I was in high school, right, I was washing dishes, and I was thinking about the test. I had like a really, I thought at the time, a very serious test coming up in high school, and it was either a final or it was something. It had a lot to do with my grade, and I was really worried about it. And I was washing dishes, and it was like this wonderful dichotomy descended upon me, and it was the realization that in 100 years, not only would no one know the grade I got, not only in that test but in that class, but most likely people wouldn't really know about me very much. Like I might be like the memory of a grandfather or something like that, or a great-grandfather, but I wouldn't really be talked about. No one would really care, especially about that test. And so I realized not only that, but not only that the test didn't matter, but that the flip side of that was that since the test didn't matter ultimately, I really had to focus on the test. Like it didn't matter, but it was all that mattered because it was going to be in my present moment the next day, and so I did have to focus on it. So it's so by no means do I think that. I think it'd be really easy for someone to say, okay, so detachment, nothing matters, I'm a nihilist, and then just kind of go towards that route, and that's not healthy at all, because that's kind of like a denial and a repression of things that are very natural, to love and to care for and to want to take care of. But I think we need to like reach that dichotomy. So I mean, does that sound like the balance that you guys are talking about?
That's exactly what I'm talking about, because you have to be able to let go, as Jeremy said, and in spiritual jargon, you're letting go and putting it in God's hands. I find that I need to relinquish the idea that I am in control and I'm now losing control over whatever situation is in front of me if I'm in a crisis, and realize I've never been in control. It's not my control, it's God's control. And once I let that go, once I don't have that concern about it being my control and I'm a failure because I'm not controlling correctly or whatever, then that frees me to be able to think through what I can and should or must do in that current situation. It's that freeness, that freeing that we experience through our Capacitat training of learning how to breathe and let go of all the anguish so that it clears the head and then I can take a next step. And in spiritual terms, I think God is always calling me, anyway, to one next step. I don't know what's coming later, and I don't know what the outcome is going to be, but I have to take that first or that next step or nothing's going to happen. And so it's not just letting go and letting God and just sitting back to see what God's going to do, but it's becoming proactive in doing what I need to do and not being paralyzed by the fear.
Yeah. The other thing that comes to mind is from the Four Agreements guy.
Yeah, C.S. Lewis.
No. Four Agreements. Don Miguel Ruiz.
There we go. Sorry. Yeah, right.
He talks a lot about so like our primary motivation in life is to belong and to feel that we matter, right? And so we have this terrifying just need to be loved, right? And like I know there's like there's the pyramid of like needs, and you're supposed to have like want food and shelter first, and then love's kind of towards the top of the Maslow's hierarchy. And I think they've done studies recently saying that actually that's not actually true. Like your need to be loved is actually it's more on par with like even basic like I'm gonna die needs. I mean it is like a basic I'm going to die need basically. And I think that a lot of how we're brought up, that test, the reason I'm sure that you were terrified about that test, if you trace the reason down, is because at some point something had been communicated to you such that if you didn't do the test, you'd have a bad grade. If you had a bad grade, if you'd be a bad student. If you're a bad student, you'd be a bad son. If you're a bad son, you would not be loved by your parents, right? Like, yeah. And obviously that's not true. Of course, your parents love you unconditionally, but in some way that they communicated to you, or a message that you got, or something you saw on TV, whatever, because it's all around us. It's in order to be loved, I have to earn it. In order to earn it, I have to be the perfect mom, or the perfect son, or a great boss, or a great partner, And so that, like, we're always trying to like earn this love, and that's, I think that's something that you, like, if you can let go of that, then all of a sudden you can just be yourself. You can be a child of God, and you can do the test because you actually want to see how you do, and you actually would like to do your best. Yeah. But not because you're afraid that you're going to be a bad anything if you don't.
Yeah, definitely. And I think you hit on something like really important, right? And the idea of self-love, and whether you title it as self-love or kind of like realizing the love of God, that whole I'm a beloved son of God or daughter of God, and to whatever extent we can do that, to whatever extent our own self-worth, or there you go, the idea of self-worth, to whatever extent our own self-worth does not depend on anybody else, that's probably the extent to which our fear either diminishes or we're able to overcome those impulses of fear in the moment. To the extent that we know it's okay, because all I need is like right here. That's all I need. And also to the extent that even if I die, that's okay, because I've been living in this kind of like protection of self-worth for however long that I've lived a fulfilled life. whether that's 5 years, 10 years, 80 years, or like a day. And I think, and so then I really think it kind of comes down to self-worth, and the extent to which we're able to find value in ourselves to the exclusion of external things. So maybe we could end it by giving like a thought of how do we do that? Do we how do we cultivate that self-worth?
I'm kind of leery of ending it there, because if it's just about self-worth, then it's just about me.
Well, okay, go ahead.
And that's the trap that our particular society that we live in has fallen into for a generation or two, and has gotten us where we are.
I disagree. I think that we have like a huge hole in us. Like society tells us that we are worth nothing, that we can only be worth something if we wear the makeup, if we, buy the clothes, if we, have the car.
And they disguise that under the term of self-worth, but that's the opposite of self-worth.
Yes.
Right.
And so like again, like I went to a workshop with the guy's son, Don Miguel Ruiz, and he talked about a lot about unconditional love, right? Loving the way God loves us. And the only way, like basically you can't give to someone else what you don't have for yourself, right? So if I can't love myself without condition, then I cannot love anyone else without condition. Like it's actually impossible.
Yes, I totally agree with that. But the key that I just heard was we must love we must love ourselves the way God loves us. And so
yes,
it's not just me. It's just not me being everything I need to be, and I am it, and the world revolves around me.
Wait, Mom. That's not self-worth, though. That's not self-worth. Self-worth is not ego. Self-worth is not me. Self-worth is understanding your value, and that your value has nothing to do with anybody else. It's not, but ego is not that. Ego is actually fear, with the disguise of power on it. Fear masquerading as something powerful. That's ego. I'm so afraid that I'm going to be lesser than whatever. I have to parade myself as something bigger. And so when I'm talking about self-worth, I think essentially that's what Jesus is trying to teach. Jesus is trying to teach us our own self-worth. He's saying, look, as much as you look at me and say, oh, wow, I'm amazing, I want you to look at yourselves that way, because that's how God sees you. And I think this is the problem. I think it's,
connection.
What's that?
That's the connection that was missing in the last few minutes of discussion.
Right, so that's the kind of self-worth I'm talking about. I'm not talking about self-worth that has anything to do, but it's, and I don't know. I'm kind of confused on how to. I mean, we could have a whole series of discussions on self-worth. So I don't really know how to put all that in to like 5 minutes without doing it horrible disservice.
Yeah, I mean, as just in the moment of conclusion, I just, since this is a theological discussion, I think we need to end it with that. We are precious because we are created in that image of love and creativity and power and everything that God is and infuses us with. There's self-worth there, that we are precious.
Okay, so how about this? Let me know what you guys think. How about this as a kind of semi-conclusion? If we're talking about self-worth, and self-worth being connected to seeing ourselves the way God sees us, seeing ourselves as having tremendous value, completely disconnected from anybody else or anything else in this world, not but totally connected to God, then I would say, and I think theologically, right, this would be correct, that if we're looking at Jesus as Christ, as God, and as the epitome or pinnacle of what we can strive to be, and Jesus saw himself as someone who needed to serve others, the litmus test for our own self-worth is how able are we to serve others, not because, like Jeremy was saying, not because of any fear we have or any sense of obligation or, oh, I have to do that again this week, but because it's the overflowing of our own self-worth. It's the overflowing of the love that we have for ourselves. We love ourselves so much, we can't help but spread it out to the people around us.
I mean, you could also say, how could we do it out of love instead of fear? I mean, I think what you said is the same thing as that, right?
Right.
Which is to your point, right? Like I think, like to truly, deeply love. I mean, so the problem is that we use self-love interchangeably with self-centeredness, right? Which is the opposite. It's
Yeah.
But to have like unconditional love for yourself, like of course it's gonna flow out and explode, and you're gonna have it for everyone else. Like you could not, right?
Sure.
Right.
Okay, so I guess we could I mean, and we could talk a little bit afterwards too, but I guess we get into by saying underneath the fear that Elijah had and Peter had in the two readings for this week was a fear of losing something, losing their life, losing people around them, and we experience that as well. And underneath that might be a little lack of self-worth, of true self-love, of theological self-love, understanding how God sees us. And so we really need to cultivate, not only individually but as a people, learn how to cultivate self-worth within self-worth and self-love, and then act from that. Is that a good way to end it?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So I'm going to sign off, and we'll see you all next week.